It's so good to be with you all once again this morning. Thank you for coming out. I know it's a little chilly out there, but I'm hoping that this lesson will warm your hearts. The Word of God tends to do that. And you can see on the screen an image of what is known as a source Bible for Thomas Jefferson's version of the Bible. Thomas Jefferson, as you most likely already know, was the third president of the United States, second vice president. And in my understanding, he created his own version of the Gospels. And it's referred to as the Jefferson Bible. And essentially what he did was eliminate all references to the miraculous. He just couldn't accept that. So this is an actual Bible that is in the Smithsonian Institute, or Smithsonian Institution, whatever it's called. And I think it's based, in my understanding, it's a source Bible, so I guess it's based on Thomas Jefferson's rendition of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And you can see how there are some verses actually cut out of that Bible. This describes a very old problem that has plagued humanity for centuries, and that is we wish in some way to redefine what God has given to us, what He's told us. This started at the very beginning when Satan tempted Eve, and Satan wanted Eve to focus on that one prohibited tree. And in order to do that, first of all, he said to Eve, "Isn't it true that God told you that you can't eat of any tree that's in the garden?" It's very, very astute. And Eve said, "No, He didn't tell us that. He told us that we can't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil." So he had her focus on that one tree. And she said to him that God told us that if we eat of this tree, we will surely die. And what did Satan say? "No, that's not going to happen. You won't die." And Eve believed that lie, unfortunately. And she wanted to readjust the truth that God had given to Adam and Eve. She accepted the idea that, well, no, we're not going to die. Nothing's going to happen. It's okay. And this is a problem that has plagued humanity, as I said before, for centuries. While listening to the radio several years ago, I don't watch the news a whole lot. To be honest with you, it's so negative, and it's not simply commenting. Unfortunately, that's what I have against news. I had this idea of creating my own news station, which I would never do because I don't have the money to do something like that. But I would call it NCN. That would be my news station. And it stands for No Comment News. Just report on what is happening in the world and keep your mouth shut. Let people come to their own conclusions, right? You go to one station, they push you in one direction. You go to another station, they push you in another direction. I don't like that. But what news I normally do get is from WCBS 880 AM. I just listen, it gives you a real short synopsis of the things that are going on in the world in like 5 minutes or less. And it's really basic, but I remember one time I was listening to the radio and a phrase was mentioned that caught my attention. A reporter stated that Catholic Cardinal, at this time he was Archbishop, Catholic Cardinal Timothy Dolan, maybe some of you have heard of Timothy Dolan before. He is a priest at St. Patrick's Cathedral, but Timothy Dolan was concerned that Governor Cuomo and the New York State Legislature were trying to redefine reality. And this was several years ago when they were coming to a decision with respect to gay marriage. And he was concerned about that. I used to be a Catholic for years, and of course a lot of things that have to do with the Catholic Church with which I'm not in agreement. But every once in a while they'll say something that will be shockingly true. And you'll say, wow, that's right on, you hit the nail right on the head. I want to share another quote with you a little bit later from Pope Benedict. You remember Pope Benedict? He said something that I thought it was fascinating. It was hit the nail right on the head. But this man, Timothy Dolan, speaking about the legalization of gay marriage in the state, he said that there is, quote, a rush to tamper with a definition as old as human reason. And Dolan goes on to say, he says, should we be more upset shouldn't we be more upset and worried about this perilous presumption of the state to reinvent the very definition of an undeniable truth? And he was talking about marriage. He was talking about marriage as we know it, one man with one woman. He said, should we be concerned, should we be worried, upset about this perilous presumption of the state to reinvent the very definition of an undeniable truth? One man, one woman, united in lifelong love and fidelity, hoping for children. That has served as the very cornerstone of civilization and culture from the start. That was his quote, his entire quote. Should we be concerned about this? We're redefining truth, a very evident truth. It's like as if truth doesn't exist. He had a blog at this time. I found it online. He had his own blog, and he was talking about this very thing. And he directed some of his comments at Governor Cuomo, who was wanting to legalize this, and I think now it's already been legalized, right? He was wanting to legalize it, as well as other legislators. And this is what Timothy Dolan said on his blog. He said, "This is not about denying rights. It is about upholding a truth. It's about upholding a truth about the human condition." He said, "Marriage is not simply a mechanism for delivering benefits. It is the union of a man and a woman in a loving, permanent, life-giving union to procreate children." And he says in his blog, please don't vote to change that. Please don't vote to change that. He said, if you do, and here's the quote on the screen, you are claiming the power to change what is not into what is, simply because you say so. That was an excellent quote. I know that Nikolai, he likes dinosaurs. He likes birds. He's very, very fascinated with things, nature. I wonder if he likes rocks too. Do you like rocks? Well, if you don't, your dad can get you hooked on them in the future. I was fascinated by rocks. I had a rock collection. Rocks are fascinating to me. They still are, and especially precious stones. Of course, I don't have any of those. But when I was a kid, one of the things I learned was I learned about pyrite. And there you see some images of pyrite on the screen there. And I learned how pyrite resembles gold, but it's not really gold. Anybody remember the other term? Oh, it's already up there, right? Oh, okay. The other term that's used to refer to pyrite is fool's gold, because it looks like gold. And you know what the problem is? It's not malleable. Gold is actually soft. You can beat it with a hammer. You can stretch it out. They've made wires super long from just an ounce of gold. Gold goes a long way. You can plate things with gold, and it's capable of being shaped. If you try doing that with pyrite, if you have a piece of gold, a solid piece of gold, a gold nugget, and you hit it with a hammer, you can actually bite. If you have 24 karat gold, you can actually bite it and leave your teeth marks in it. That's how soft it is. But if you do that with pyrite and take a hammer to pyrite, it's not going. You can't shape it. It's brittle. It cracks. You'll turn it into a million different pieces when you hit it with a hammer. We may fool ourselves into believing that the joining of two men or two women in marriage makes it a marriage. But that doesn't make it so. We may fool ourselves into believing that that's real gold. We may accept it. Yeah, that's gold. That's gold. You know, Governor Cuomo said it's gold. It's got to be gold. That's what he said. The New York legislature said that's gold, and it's just as good as the other stuff that's malleable. No, it's not. We can't redefine truth in that way. Gold is one thing. Pyrite is another thing entirely different. Here's another example. Let's say if one day the New York Assembly and Senate passed legislation. They passed legislation granting the moon the same status as the sun. That would be regarded as an absurd redefinition of an old reality. We would ask them, are you guys out of your minds? What are you doing? Don't you realize that the moon is a small satellite that orbits the earth and no light emanates from it? It has a solid iron-rich inner core. And in contrast, the sun is a star. Those things are not equal. It's a star composed mainly of hydrogen, and it creates its own light by means of nuclear fusion. Granting the moon the same status as the sun would be absolutely ridiculous. And that's what they've done with marriage, unfortunately. They take two men want to get married to each other. That has the same status as a man marrying a woman. Or two women has the same status as a man. It's not so. We're fooling ourselves. We're allowing our government to give us fool's gold and selling it to us as gold. It's not that, it's not so. Such legislation is in wholly disregard of truth. And of course there are other things. I just use the idea of gay marriage as an example, right? There are other things that we could bring up. We could talk about abortion, right? No, it's not murder. It's fine. It's acceptable. We could talk about legislation to protect animals and almost put them on the same plane of importance as human beings. Remember Gary Eubanks, the preacher of Piscataway. He actually subscribed to National Geographic. I think it was from 1976. He's been reading he told me, I've read every single issue, every single page of every issue. I think he started, I don't know, it was 1976 or 73 or something like that. He's been doing it for years, but he recently canceled his subscription. He just could not take it anymore because they were trying to push him and other readers in a certain direction with regard to things that really had nothing to do with geography, National Geographic. Right? One of the things was the front page of one issue of National Geographic talked about the killing of gorillas in a certain part of Africa. And it referred to the killing of those animals as murder. And Gary said, this is absurd. Murder is a term that's used with respect to human beings, not animals. Trying to put animals on the same level of importance. The problem is, nowadays, that society has been showing its total disdain for truth. For many, truth really doesn't exist. Truth has, and you're probably wondering, what in the world is Santa Claus doing up there? I'll bring that up a little bit later, okay? And truth has lost its importance in American society. Not only in American society, throughout the world. This is in part the result of two popular philosophies. I know this gets a little technical, but I hope you'll bear with me. The two popular philosophies that are permeating American society today are existentialism and postmodernism. Existentialism and postmodernism. First of all, existentialism is the idea that we determine what is right and wrong based on our own experiences and based on our own reasoning. Okay? The difference between existentialism and postmodernism is that reason really flies out the window. Existentialism has to do more with human reason. We can arrive at truth by means of logic, but postmodernism it's more what you feel. And absolute truth really does not exist for the existentialist. There's no such thing as absolute truth. Existentialism is related to postmodernism. I don't know if one grew out of the other. I'm not really sure about all that, but we could say that those who've been affected by existentialism will say things like, for instance, that might be right for you, but not for me. One time I was talking with my mother about abortion, and I come from a Catholic family, and you would think that Catholics would be against abortion, but no, that's even changing. And one time I was we were talking about this subject, and my mother said to me, what might be murder for you may not be murder necessarily for another person. Well, that's existentialism. And arriving at truth by one's own logic, by one's own reasoning. And another idea might be you determine what's right for you, or one man's opinion is as good as another's. And we've seen the influence of such thinking when we try to talk to people about the Bible. How many times have people told us that's just your interpretation? They're using human reasoning in order to discredit some kind of Bible teaching that we're trying to share with them. And they're saying, no, that's just your interpretation. In other words, the Bible is open to multiple interpretations. Did God intend the Bible? Did God intend His message to be modified and to be manipulated by multiple, countless interpretations? No. He has one message for us, and we have to try to find out what that is. To say that there are multiple interpretations just is not right. I remember one time a brother in Ireland, when we were friends, we obeyed the gospel the same hour of the night. I mentioned him, but he's been living in Ireland since 1997. I think he was talking to someone about Matthew chapter 16, verse 16, and we'll be talking about that verse here in this lesson. He who believes and is baptized will be saved. And the person came out and said, that's just your interpretation. So my friend Glenn said, okay, what is your interpretation? I read that Jesus says here, he who believes and is baptized will be saved. I've come to the conclusion by reading this verse that he who believes and is baptized will be saved. What's your interpretation? The person, it's like people nowadays will say, the Bible contradicts itself, right? You ever heard that argument? A real good way of answering that argument simply is to say, oh, can you show me one? You never read the thing, Never read the Bible. That's what happens a lot of times. But I once saw a TV program in Spain, in Seville. A sister, a member of the church in Seville, shared it with me. And she actually recorded on tape, VHS, years ago. And she recorded this program because it had to do with different views regarding homosexuality, but from religious leaders. And, some, of course, were against it, and they said clearly this is sin, and that's what the Bible teaches. But others were in favor of it. And they interviewed one fellow, pastor of, I guess it was maybe a Methodist church or something of that nature. And there were images in the program of him sitting in his study. He was surrounded by books in his library, hundreds of books. He had books open on his desk. I guess this is some time before eSword and Logos and other programs. You could have everything open up on your laptop. I used to do that too. I have bunch of books open on my desk, right? But he had all the books open. And this particular Methodist minister, I guess he's Methodist, he was a practicing homosexual, if I'm not mistaken. And he said that he had come to the conclusion, after diligent study, that what God condemns in the Bible is not homosexuality, but prostitution. That's existentialism right there. And the idea is you arrive at your own truth by your own reasoning, and you just overrule truth. In contrast, those who respect the importance of truth we realize that both the Old and New Testaments disapprove of homosexuality. We're not going to get into those verses. Leviticus chapter 18, Romans chapter 1. We understand that. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 and 10 teach clearly. There's just no way of getting around this truth, this evident truth. In both the Old and New Testaments, homosexuality does not have God's approval. Postmodernism, as I said before, is similar to existentialism in that it emphasizes that there's no absolute truth. But as I said before, whereas existentialism tends to focus on human reasoning in order to arrive at truth, postmodernism is based more on arriving at truth by feelings. Postmodernists believe that truth is whatever you feel it to be. The idea of arriving at truth by means of human reasoning or rationalism is thrown out the window. Rationalism is not a way of arriving at truth. Or science is not a way of arriving at truth. Postmodernism teaches that you feel it, what is to be right. I've had people talk to me about an inner light, an inner truth. Apart from the Bible, God reveals truth apart from what has been revealed in His Word. We can arrive at it and by means of our feelings, by means of what we feel to be right or wrong. And postmodernists are also pluralistic. Pluralism regards all religions as equally good. Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, it's all the same. Actually, it's considered disrespectful, and we see a lot of this nowadays. It's considered disrespectful and a lack of tolerance to claim that one religion is right and another is wrong. Those who regard one religion as superior in nature to another are looked upon with disdain. I read an article, a very interesting article years ago. It was from Newsweek. And the article was entitled, and it had to do with American society. And the article was entitled, quote, "We are all Hindus now." We are all Hindus now. That was the name of the article. And it did a great job describing the mindset of many Americans today. And it says, in it the author says, quote, "We are slowly becoming more like Hindus and less like traditional Christians in the ways we think about God, ourselves, each other, and eternity. The Rig Veda, the most ancient Hindu scripture, says this: truth is one, but the sages speak of it by many names. A Hindu believes that there are many paths to God. Jesus is just one way. The Quran is another. Yoga practice is a third. None is better than any other. All are equal." That's what the article says. Where Maria and I live, we live in Franklin Park, New Jersey, and we're surrounded by Indians and Orientals. You wouldn't believe the number of temples going up in our area. It's kind of shocking. It's discouraging in a way, but there's some Indians are buying up huge plots of land, and they're putting these giant temples on them. By the way, you know where the largest Buddhist temple is in the world? Anybody have any idea? The largest in the world. California. There's one close to where we live, maybe 5 minutes from where we live. You can see it right from Route 27. You can go from Franklin Park to Princeton by Route 27. It's just about 15 minutes from us. And as you're driving, to the right-hand side, there's a multicolored flag where the mailbox is. I don't know what that flag represents. I don't know if it doesn't look like the flag of a particular nation. It could be a flag of a certain religion, but you drive by that flag and you look behind the house, and there's a small Cape Cod house. You know what a Cape Cod, that style is just a pointed roof, it's basic. Behind that house, there's a huge image of Buddha, bigger than a house probably itself. Temples are just popping up all over the place. And it's no wonder, because we're slowly becoming like them. We're developing the same type of mindset. I spoke one time with one of my Indian neighbors, and I said, I'm a Christian. I believe in the New Testament as God's revelation of truth. The Bible is God's revelation of truth to mankind. And he was saying, that's great. Dude, that's good. That's good. And I believe that Jesus Christ, salvation is only through Him. That's good. You need to believe that. You need to follow Jesus Christ with all your being, and He has to be number one in your life, and you have to give Him your very best. And the person who follows Buddha, he has to give him his very best, and that's what God, that's what Krishna requires of us, that whatever our beliefs are, we have to follow them with all our heart. And that is the path to salvation. It doesn't matter what you believe, whether it's Muhammad or Buddha but we're developing that mindset. Instead of taking a stand for truth, Americans are becoming more like those who are immigrating to this country. we're adapting their mindset. The pluralization of America, and we talk about pluralism, we're saying that pluralism regards all religions as equally good. Okay, just keep that in your mind. So the pluralization of America has led to moral relativism. And relativism has led to a loss of reason. Reason is no longer an acceptable method used to arrive at an understanding of truth, but rather each one is taught to believe the truth whatever you make it to be. You make your own truth. My truth is just as good as yours is just as good as mine, even though they may be in direct contradiction to each other. This is the mentality of a lot of people. This reminds me of a satirical poem that I want to share with you. A satirical poem by English journalist Steve Turner, okay, and it's called Creed. And this creed describes the mindset of millions of people. Look what he says. And he describes the mindset of many in America today. He says, "We believe that each man must find the truth that is right for him. Reality will adapt accordingly. The universe will readjust. History will alter. We believe that there is no absolute truth, accepting the truth that there is no absolute truth. If chance, there's more. I didn't have everything here. I've got some more in my outline. He says, we believe, in this poem, this satirical poem, we believe in sex before, during, and after marriage. We believe in the therapy of sin. We believe that adultery is fun. We believe that sodomy is okay. We believe that taboos are taboo. We believe that everything is getting better, despite evidence to the contrary. The evidence must be investigated, and you can prove anything with evidence. We believe there's something in horoscopes, UFOs, and bent spoons. Jesus was a good man, just like Buddha, Muhammad, and ourselves. He was a good moral teacher, although we think some of his good morals are really bad. We believe that all religions are basically the same, at least the one that we read was. They all believe in love and goodness. They only differ on matters of creation, sin, heaven, hell, God, and salvation. We believe that after death comes the nothing, because when you ask the dead what happens, they say nothing. If death is not the end, if the dead have lied, then it's compulsory heaven for all, excepting perhaps Hitler, Stalin, and Genghis Khan. We believe in Masters and Johnson. What's selected is average. What's average is normal. What's normal is good. We believe in total disarmament. We believe there are direct links between warfare and bloodshed. Americans should beat their guns into tractors, and the Russians would be sure to follow. We believe that man is essentially good. It's only his behavior that has let him down. This is the fault of society. Society is the fault of conditions. Conditions are the fault of society. And this is what he says here. Actually, let me see. We believe that, yeah, I've already read that one. We believe that, let's see. Yeah, we've already read this one. We believe that each man must find the truth that is right for him. Reality will adapt accordingly. The universe will readjust. History will alter. We believe that there is no absolute truth, accepting the truth that there is no absolute truth. We believe in the rejection of creeds and the flowering of individual thought. Now there's a postscript after this poem, this satirical poem. There's a postscript. Look what he says here. If chance be the father of all flesh, and disaster is his rainbow in the sky, and when you hear state of emergency, sniper kills 10, troops on rampage, youths go looting, bomb blasts school, it is but the sound of man worshiping his maker. This is the result, my brethren, friends. This is the result of rejecting absolute truth. Consequences are grave. let's talk a little bit about Santa. Santa Claus. You might be wondering, what in the world does this have to do with your lesson, Jerry? Well, this way of thinking is evident even in something seemingly innocent as telling children about Santa Claus. I told my kids for years, and I hope I'm not ruining anybody's surprise here, but I told my kids for years, since they were the littlest things, he does not exist. There's no man that lives in the North Pole with elves and all that other stuff. No, that's just something that people have made up at a time of year when they exchange presents. I told my kids that. I wanted them to know the truth about that, and of course a lot of other things. A lot of parents don't have that mentality, right? They believe it's okay to lie to your children about Santa Claus, and then one day when they're like 13, you mean he really doesn't exist? All this time? I mean, there are kids that actually reach a certain age and they actually believe that Santa had been coming to their house and dropping climbing down through the chimney and putting the presents under the tree, and that you leave milk and cookies for Santa Claus, and Santa Claus, he'll drink some of that milk, eat those cookies, when it's actually mom and dad are doing it. But we moved, my kids knew this when we lived in Spain. We moved back to the States, and I have 3 siblings. I'm the oldest of 4. After me, my brother David. After that, my sister Carolyn, and Christine is the baby of the family. And my siblings, raised Catholic, they're all telling their children that Santa Claus is real. He really exists. And one day, my daughter's in the car with her cousins, and they're talking among themselves. And my daughter just comes out in a very matter-of-fact way and says, no, Santa Claus is not real. That's just, man's imagination. People invented Santa Claus. It's your parents, they're the ones who are giving you the presents. And one of her cousins, visibly upset. I think my daughter told her cousins this in the back seat of the car. Her cousin, visibly upset, stands up in the car and sister, Daddy, is Santa real? And my brother responded to her, he's real for those who truly believe. I realize that some may think that my decision to tell my kids the truth about Santa Claus from the very beginning takes a view of truthfulness that's too strict. That's my siblings would think that way. They would think, you're going overboard. You're stick in the mud. You're too antiquated. You're too old-fashioned. You're going overboard. This is overkill. But my point here is that my problem with this is that, not with Santa Claus per se. My problem's not with Santa Claus, but rather with an attitude towards truth in general. It is a good idea, or is it a good idea? Is it a good idea to encourage children to think that something is real simply because they truly believe it to be real? There are a lot of people that reach adulthood and they have this mentality. It's real because I believe it to be real. Mindset behind this tradition, one can know that something is true or real simply because he believes it to be so. Okay, before I get to that, I want to share something with you. I told you I was going to mention a quote by Pope Benedict. And I said at the beginning of this lesson, Timothy Dolan, now Cardinal Dolan of the Catholic Church, he said some very truthful things with respect to same-sex marriage, and I appreciate that. Well, Pope Benedict, when he came into power, if I can refer to it that way, when he was chosen as head of the Catholic Church, he made a very interesting comment regarding society's disdain for absolute truth. And I believe with this quote, he hits the nail on the head. This is what he said. He said, today, having a clear faith based on the creed of the church. Now he's talking about the creed of the Apostolic Church. But Having a clear faith based on the creed of the church is often labeled as fundamentalism. When I started reading the Bible, studying the Bible, and I started telling my parents I wanted to be just a Christian, I didn't want to be part of any religious denomination, they labeled me as a fundamentalist. Now here we have the Pope saying 30 years later that having a clear faith based on, to them, the creed of the church is labeled as fundamentalism. But this is what he says. He goes on to say, whereas relativism, that is, letting oneself to be tossed here and there, carried about by every wind of doctrine, seems to be the only attitude that can cope with modern times. We are building a dictatorship of relativism that does not recognize anything as definitive and whose ultimate goal consists solely of one's own ego and desires. Think about that. With that last phrase, he hits the nail right on the head. We are building a dictatorship of relativism. The idea of relativism means that absolute truth does not exist. And he said this is turning into a dictatorship. And I think that's what's happening here in this country. A dictatorship is when the government or when others try to force their beliefs on you. You have no freedom, right? Well, that's what people are trying to do with us, with our religious beliefs. They're trying to force this idea on us that absolute truth does not exist, that we have to be tolerant of all religious beliefs. I was talking to Marcy, I think I was talking to Marcy about this a couple days ago, about how my kids, when they started public school and we moved back from Spain, one day my kids come home with this paper and it says, "Celebrate Diversity Day." And I said, there's no way we're going to celebrate this, you know. And I think I actually ended up putting something on Facebook later, and I said, you may have the right, by law, to marry someone of the same sex. But please, don't try to force me to accept that as good and wholesome, as being the will of God. It's one thing to say that, okay, they have that right under law, and to respect them as individuals and to try to reach them with the gospel and show them love. I can respect them in that sense. But can I respect their lifestyle? No. Please don't try to force me to accept that lifestyle. But that's what a dictator of dictatorship of relativism does. It tries to force this down our throats. And let's talk about Mark 16:16 a little bit. Because people really do the exact same thing. And actually, before I get into this point about Mark 16:16, I want to share another illustration with you that shows society's disdain for truth. I want you to listen to this illustration carefully. It's amazing. It's something that happened in Russia years ago. It's amazing. It took place in one of the meetings of the old Russian Comintern, an international communist organization founded in Moscow around the end of World War I. Okay, so it's something that occurred in the old Russian Comintern. And this man by the name of Ignacio Saloni, he spoke about how some stratagem, he's talking to the government leaders, he spoke to them about how some stratagem, he was speaking to them of how some stratagem was under discussion, and a delegate, there was a newcomer there in that meeting, a newcomer who had never attended before. He made the extraordinary observation that if such and such a statement were to be made, it wouldn't be true. So this other fellow was speaking to the Russian Comintern about something, and this new delegate said, if we made that statement, it wouldn't be true. This actually happened. There was a moment of dazed silence, and then everyone began to laugh. They laughed and laughed till tears ran down their cheeks, and the Kremlin walls began to shake. The same laughter echoes in every council chamber and cabinet room, wherever two or more are gathered together to exercise authority, it's not God that has died, but rather truth. They laughed at that young delegate and said, if we make this statement, it would not be true. They laughed and laughed and laughed till the walls shook. God hasn't died, truth has died. That's why we're talking about this lesson, redefining truth. That's why we've come to this conclusion that two men marrying each other are equal to marriage. That is a lie. Truth has been redefined. But it's nothing new for us anyway, because this is what religious people, this is what people in the denominations have been doing for years. This is what people in the Protestant world have been doing for 500 years. The Protestant Reformation started around the beginning of the 14th century, right? 1503, something like that. And the ideas, the prevalent ideas coming out of the Protestant Reformation with respect to salvation is that baptism is not necessary. Salvation is by faith alone. Martin Luther said that man is incapable of exercising, he can't exercise a single muscle of his will without God acting on him in some way. God actually has to give a person faith in order to enable him to believe. And of course, baptism is thrown out the window. But what did Jesus say? He who believes and is baptized will be saved. Isn't that what Mark chapter 16 says? Did I open the Bible? No, I didn't. I forgot. Okay, well, you know what it says. I need to open it anyway, so bear with me. Sorry about that. Slipped my mind. I only have about 45 minutes to go, if I'm not mistaken, in this lesson. Lee told me to go extra long. He said the brethren here love that. I'm just kidding. Let's see here. Sorry about this. Now I've got to open this, and I've got to... Let's see, what we're... Number 20... Okay, that's where we are right now. And let's go back to let's go to the Bible. Let's read the passage together in Mark chapter 16 and verse 16. Jesus says here, he who believes and is baptized and has been baptized shall be saved, but he who has disbelieved shall be condemned. Let's look at the first part of this verse again. He who believes and has been baptized shall be saved. Is it all that difficult to understand? Isn't it amazing how this verse is so controversial? So controversial that even though it's the truth is plain, it's understandable. You have to believe and be baptized in order to be what? Saved, right? No problem understanding that. That's the truth revealed to us by Jesus Christ. And yet, what do people want to do with baptism? They just want to cross it out. They're like Thomas Jefferson at the beginning of this lesson. They just want to cut that word out of the Bible. And the other passages that talk about baptism, what are they doing? They're redefining truth. Jesus says, he clearly says in the other passages in the New Testament that baptism is a necessary part of God's plan for man so that he may be saved. And people want to readjust the truth to fit their agenda. It's sad, but that's what's going on. Let's talk a little about truth as defined by the Bible. In the midst of the world's relativism, in the midst of the world's moral relativism, Jesus Christ is presented in the New Testament as the perfect embodiment of truth. He himself said in John chapter 14 and verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. I remember one time when I was writing my brother about the importance of accepting the teachings of the Scriptures. He said to me that the religion of Jesus Christ is all-inclusive. Well, God wants all men to be saved, right? And the gospel is for all. But do you realize that John chapter 14 and verse 6 is the most, what is the word? Exclusivistic? Is that the word? Exclusivist? I don't know what the word would be in. Exclusivistic, of any religion. of any religion that exists on the face of this earth. Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. That's not saying that it doesn't matter if you can be a Buddhist, you can be a Hindu, you can believe in Muhammad, you can believe the Quran, you can believe whatever you want to believe, and just that God includes all those as part of His people, and they're going to be saved regardless of those different beliefs of that. No. Jesus here says something entirely different. You remember the article that I mentioned, the Newsweek article about we are all Hindus now? That doesn't agree with what Jesus said in John chapter 14, verse 6, right? They say there are many paths to God. The Apostle Peter reiterates this fact in Acts chapter 4 and verse 12. You remember that passage? You go to it real quick. Acts chapter 4 and verse 12. Peter says here, and there is salvation in no one else. For there is no other name under heaven that has been given among men by which we must be saved. That's also very exclusivistic. Wouldn't you say? People don't like it when someone says, I have the truth. Because such a declaration is regarded as too exclusive in our pluralistic society. And yet this is the very nature of truth. And no one has ever made a more exclusive statement than what Jesus said in John 14:6. Jesus shows His utmost respect for truth when He says in John chapter, I don't have this passage up here, I don't believe. John chapter 4 and verse 23, that may be a little bit, no, it's not on here, it's not on the screen, but in John chapter 4 and verse 23, Jesus shows His utmost respect for truth when He says, an hour is coming and now is, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people, the Father seeks to be His worshipers. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth. Jesus shows His respect for truth. Also in John chapter 8, verses 31 and 32, Jesus says in this passage here, if you continue in my word, then you are truly my disciples. You're truly disciples of mine, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. And there are, of course, other passages that talk about the importance of truth. And I think you got the point. You remember when Jesus told Pontius Pilate in John chapter 18, you say correctly that I am a king. For this I've been born, and for this I've come into the world, to testify to what? To testify to the truth. Jesus came for that purpose, to testify to the truth. We're talking about John chapter 18. Everyone who is of the truth, Jesus says, hears my voice. You remember what Pilate did? He said, what is truth? And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews. I get the impression that he didn't hang around for the answer. And that's the attitude that a lot of people have with respect to truth nowadays. One last point before I wrap things up. As we've already seen, many are quick to affirm there's no such thing as absolute truth. In other words, truth about God and salvation is relative and not limited to what is found in the Bible. Well then, I might ask, how can I know that something is true or real? People will tell me, simply because I believe it to be so. That would be the response of many. It doesn't matter if my belief contradicts what you believe or even reality itself. The important thing is that I believe it. That's the mentality of many people today. There's only one way to describe this mentality, that you can define your own truth. Truth is what you make it to be. There's only one thing that can describe it, and that is pride. This is because such a person makes himself to be the standard of truth. But really, humility is what we need in our lives. The humble don't have a problem with the truth. They accept it. They accept God's word at face value. It's the proudful that have a hard time accepting it. It takes humility to avoid this common mindset. That's what we see in the world today. And Jesus said in Luke chapter 9 and verse 23, and I mentioned, I think, this verse last night, if anyone wishes to follow me or come after me, let him take up his cross, let him deny himself. And I said that's the most fundamental ingredient of the gospel, the message of the gospel. In order for us to receive this message, first of all, we have to deny ourselves. And so many people are just not willing to do that. They would prefer to define truth themselves. They don't want to deny themselves. We need to exalt truth above all things and not be left with the false idea that truth is simply what you make it to be. Proverbs chapter 23 and verse 23 says, buy the truth and sell it not. Is that how it goes, Lee? Something like that? Buy the truth. There was a brother, a member of the church in Seville, and he would cite this verse to refer to those who would sell Bibles. They would actually sell them in bookstores and things like that. So they go, they would go, and I said, no, it's not referring to that. It's not talking about selling Bibles in a bookstore. The idea is that when we should accept the truth and not exchange it for anything else. Not exchange it for a lie. When God wants to give you gold, right? He wants to give you gold. Don't accept pyrite in its place. God bless you. We'll have a 5-minute, I didn't finish at 10 minutes till, but I did what I could. We'll have a short break and then we'll get into the next lesson. Thank you.